Hey, it's Chris, the Supply Chain Doctor. Over the years, I've interviewed some of the brightest minds and successful leaders in supply chain management. In May 2020, I sat down with supply chain leader Ken Ackerman to learn more about him and collect a little supply chain management history. After the interview, Ken told me about a similar interview he had with Dr. Jim Stock many years prior, and the related work Dr. Stock did. In November 2020, I was able to catch up with Dr. Stock to learn about him and his work. As an academic in the world of transportation, logistics, and what we now call supply chain management, Jim was well connected to many of the original academic thought leaders in the space. Jim did interviews with many of these thought leaders and shared them with me. The list includes Ken Ackerman, Don Bowersox, James Haskett, Bud Lalonde, John Langley Jr., Tom Menser, Tom Spee, and Daniel Wren. To carry on the great work started by Dr. Jim Stock, I'm dusting off these interviews and bringing them to you to help you get a better understanding of supply chain management and hopefully become a more effective supply chain professional.
You mentioned mathematics was your major as an undergraduate, and you liked math because it was less reading and you were very quantitative anyway. What did you envision doing with that mathematics degree?
Well, interesting, because when you and I were talking earlier, I mentioned that actually I made it. When I was in high school, right before I started college, I took a vocational interest test that suggested that my interests had nothing in common with those of successful mathematicians, and that's fully understandable. But I took that a little bit too much to heart, and I changed my major when I got to Penn State from math to business, and I thought that would be a little bit better move for me. And then I spent a semester in the business school, and I thought, at this stage in my career, I think I would like something else, so I transferred to pre-med. Now, normally, it's people dropping out of pre-med into other areas, but I went into pre-med, and then 2 or 3 semesters or terms, as we called them later, I ended up back in mathematics, where I really enjoyed what I did. And that was very helpful to me, because the most interesting subject I studied in math was mathematical statistics. And that was a great entree for me following my undergraduate work to then qualify for an assistantship in the business school at Penn State, because I had some understanding of math stat. And so,
Now, you mentioned that your mother had a college degree. Your father had gone a couple of years or so.
yes.
Was there anyone else in your family that had a college degree?
No, I'm the only one in my family that has a college degree.
You only have a Ph.D. then as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So your family was very supportive of you going to college. Were they supportive of the direction you took as a college student?
Yeah, they were nothing but as helpful as possible. During my collegiate years, they supported what I was doing and so forth. The selection of majors and so forth. That was something that they kind of left up to me. They gave me advice on it, but it wasn't as if they told me what to do. They basically suggested I look at the advantages and disadvantages of whatever decision and kind of make my own decision. So they were very supportive of that. But you asked me earlier about what I was going to do with math, and I quite honestly had no idea what I was going to do with it. Whether research or teaching or whatever. And as it turns out, I think I leveraged the kind of structured, quantitative, analytical thinking into trying to be a person who can analyze business issues and problems. And so it really paid off. Of course, the longer you study mathematics, the more abstract it becomes, and you get to a point where, unless you're really going to be a math theoretician, the theory part of it is not something that's going to help you a lot. But most of what I did study was a great help.
Now, where did you get the inclination towards being a college professor? Was that during your undergraduate years or later?
Actually, I was a graduate student at Penn State, and I was in the MBA program. And I had the distinct privilege of working with some really fine people at Penn State, and one of them was Professor Jack Haya, who's professor emeritus. He still lives here in State College. And Jack was teaching courses in quantitative business analysis, and I was his grad assistant. And he had to go on a professional trip one time, and he asked me if I'd like to teach a class. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And so I did. And that was kind of the predecessor to me actually having my own course in QBA that I taught while I was a graduate student and so forth. And that sparked my interest in learning more about what professors do, aside from what I was observing as a student. And I had a chance to get a good peek at, what they were doing in terms of teaching and research and service and so forth. And I liked what I saw and decided that an academic career was something that might be pretty interesting to me.
So there was no individual that steered you towards that?
No one steered me toward that except for circumstances, qualifying for the assistantship and right place, right time and so forth. But no one told me that that's what I needed to do or should think about doing.
So you assumed that you would ultimately then get the Ph.D. once you started teaching that QBA course and seeing what the other faculty did on the Penn State campus, that sort of...
Pretty much, yeah. Mm-hmm. Not sure what that Ph.D. was what subject matter it would cover, but definitely pointed myself toward further study.
Okay. Did you ever think about using the Ph.D. for non-academic reasons, consulting or business?
No, and I've thought a little bit about that because if you look at people who hold the Ph.D. degree from different institutions, most of the people getting Ph.D., my observation is anyway, that most people getting Ph.D.s from business schools tend to go into academic positions. If you look at I spent a number of years at Georgia Tech, for example, working in the School of Industrial and Systems Engineering. Would not be fair to say that most people who get Ph.D.s in engineering go into academic work because I think that the job opportunities are broader and so forth. But, I never really thought too much about. Now, I did think about going into the business world, which in ways that would be unrelated to having a Ph.D. But your question related to using a Ph.D. to go in a different direction now, only the academic direction, really.
So do you think, as you think back, would you have liked to have pursued other areas like in business before getting the Ph.D.?
In an ideal world, yes. And that's what I advise students of all types, that particularly when you're going to pursue graduate work, if you have the opportunity to gain some practical experience, that's always going to help. And not so much to help in a seasoning, an experiential kind of thing, but just to give you a frame of reference, where you've actually dealt with real problems that, maybe then you can look at with an academic lens on it. But so if I go back, sure. The thing about it is, though, I think right in today's economy, I would have very different advice because I guess the question would be, I wouldn't advise anyone to leave a full-time position unnecessarily because of the way the economy is. But back in the earlier days, I think the idea of getting some experience would have been interesting, but it wasn't discussed as much in terms of what people would do.
Were there any individuals, faculty members, acquaintances, business people, perhaps, that you think had a significant influence on your development into a Ph.D. and ultimately an academic?
Yeah, and it's a pretty long list because I have had the good fortune of being in the company of a lot of really, really good people in my career. As a matter of fact, I would credit anything I've done that may look as being worthwhile as a product of being around the company I've been in for so many years, including not only former professors, but my faculty colleagues and so forth. Every single one of whom is different from all the rest, but collectively, it's been an environment that I found a really great one to be in. But in terms of specific people, I've got to acknowledge a few people at Penn State. I already mentioned Professor Jack Haya, and the two people most, 2 or 3 at Penn State Professor John Coyle, Professor Bob Pashek, who is no longer with us, and nor is a third one that is not a logistician, but a gentleman named Dr. Hayes Gamble. And those three people at Penn State were highly instrumental in kind of guiding me through my Ph.D. program. And the way Penn State treated its Ph.D. students is something I've tried to keep in mind as I've worked with people in my life, because it was nothing but treating the students as well as they possibly could and so forth, and they've always been supportive of everything that's being done. It's still that way here, and hopefully I've been able to take at least some of that, work effectively with students over my years.
Okay. Do you think in terms of those faculty members, you have all your degrees from Penn State. Were those folks influential when you're in the master's program or just in the doctoral program? And if doctoral program, what made you stay at Penn State for a third degree?
Well, what made me stay was that it was a perfectly good place to study for a Ph.D. I was comfortable with the surroundings. It was a first-class program in logistics, and I didn't really have any reason to look elsewhere. I guess if you were to go back and change anything, you might ask me would I preferred to maybe do 3 programs at 3 different universities. I think there's a value to that. The way it worked out for me, though, I spent 3 different programs at the same university, but if you look at what I was doing, the math program and the MBA and the PhD program are all very different kinds of programs, and so there was a fair amount of diversity in terms of what I was exposed to. So,
okay. How about military experience? Were you in the military?
I was a member of the United States Army Reserves.
Okay.
And spent 6 years in the Army Reserves. It was kind of an interesting. I was, of course, in the 1960s, we had a lot of conflict going on and so forth, and a lot of people being drafted. I was in school, and I had never asked for a draft deferment or anything, but I had what most students had, whatever the classification was as a full-time student. And one of my roommates, who was about to lose his student deferment, joined the reserve unit, and I just called them up and asked them if they needed anybody else. And I joined the reserves at that time. So,
what type of unit was it?
It was the unit I joined was outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and it was a. Trying to think what kind of a unit it was. I was a pay dispersing specialist. So I went off to school. Really impressive training the Army had for pay and dispersing, finance people, so forth. So I came back. It was interesting because I lived in State College when I joined the reserves, and we joined the unit outside of Harrisburg, which is 2 hours away. And before we joined, they said, "Now we don't want you to join our unit and then go through your training and then come back and transfer to State College." They wanted people who were going to be down there. So actually what I did was I didn't transfer directly to the State College unit. I transferred to a Boston unit, and then I transferred to State College. But in State College, I was a member of a unit that I don't know that it exists any longer, but it was a light equipment maintenance company, and which actually very, very good strategic purpose for the military. And each of these units has certain mission and so forth. And so the mission of this one was managing light equipment for the Army.
Okay. So, how many years were you in the reserves?
I was in for 6 years.
Okay.
Spend most of your first year in training, basic training, so forth, advanced training, then you come back and become a functioning member of your reserve unit. So that's
okay.
What I did.
Did you form any long-lasting relationships in that reserve unit?
I don't think there was anything long-lasting. Most of the guys in the unit, let me correct myself on that. There are several guys that were in that unit that I keep in touch with reasonably frequently these days, but for the most part, no. They were just fellow students at Penn State that had joined the reserves, and we would see each other 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer for our weekend warrior duty.
Do you have any fond memories of that reserve unit?
Well, I do. It was, it's interesting because we had such a devastating conflict going on in Vietnam at the time and so forth. So, but it wasn't like in today's world where if you're in the reserves, the likelihood of heading over to Afghanistan or somewhere is pretty high. But back in those days, they didn't seem to call up the reserves as much. But we were ready to go if we had to. But it was just kind of an interesting opportunity. If I tell one little funny story, we found an extra hour one day, and we were trying to find a place to go play bridge. 4 of us, we had a bridge game in mind, and so we found the back of a deuce and a half, which is a big truck, and it was backed up against a fence, and we figured nobody would find us there. And so we got the folding table set up, got the cards dealt out, we're ready to go, and somebody goes and starts driving the truck away with us in the back, so we all jumped out pretty quickly.
Didn't finish the game.
No, but the experience of being in the reserves is one small part of a big military, and very, very complex, obviously. And I've thought about this a lot. It's important to have a lot of different capabilities ready to go and so forth. And so we were just part of a much bigger picture.
Well, I know you've done work as an academic with military.
We have.
Did you think that helped, having the reserve experience?
I think it does help because I spent time at various military installations, and we were. Matter of fact, it was I was involved in military logistics before I was involved in Ph.D. level studying of logistics, which was gave me a lot of insight into things like warehouse management and so forth. I guess one major impression I have from all that is just the enormity of the scale of a military, and the I got my hands dirty with stock keeping records and that kind of thing, but and nomenclature for inventory items, and it's just it's just something that can be overwhelming. And of course that was 30-40 years ago, when the information technologies we had back then were nothing compared to what we've got now, and so lots and lots of paper to manage things, and so hopefully it's much improved now.
Okay. Now, when you finished your Ph.D. degree, what schools did you look at? What made you go to Tennessee as opposed to somewhere else?
Well, from my office at Penn State, I had my office at one of the research centers. I had a big map of the United States, and for no particular reason, I had drawn in the Mason-Dixon line with a black magic marker, and I was going to confine my search of universities to anything north of there. And I think the reason was because I hadn't really spent a lot of time in areas south of the Mason-Dixon line, no political suggestions here at all, just a geographical line. And during the year I graduated, the University of Tennessee was adding to their faculty. Matter of fact, they added a professor the year before I graduated, and they added two people the year I was graduating, including myself, and I had applied there, and so forth. And but at the time, the University of Tennessee was one of the very few universities in the country. I mean, there was a handful, maybe 5, 6, 7, and so forth. A very small number compared to the number of academic programs in logistics that we have now. And so that was just a great opportunity, and I interviewed and never looked back in terms of the decision to join that faculty.
Okay. Now, you've made 2 changes in your career, from Tennessee to Georgia Tech, and then now to Penn State. What were the circumstances that led you to make a change after 28 years at Tennessee and 10 years at Georgia Tech?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've thought a lot about that, and you're right. I've been at 3 universities. I still live in Knoxville, Tennessee, though. So we, and the reason we still live there is we're just part of the community and so forth. I do a lot of things there and so forth. So we have no reason to want to move. But my 28 years at Tennessee were extremely valuable. When I started there, I think my biggest challenge professionally was trying to make some headway with the topic of logistics, because that was kind of the new kid on the block back in the early 70s. And if you say new kid, what was the old kid? Well, the old kid was the study of the functional activities that comprise logistics, but for their own sake, transportation, warehousing, and so forth. And my take on it is that what logistics really does in essence is it suggests that if you can manage the functional activities in a collective manner and integrate them, you can make a better decision than if you manage them separately. And the other thing is you do that on behalf of providing a level of service to the customer. That's, in my terms, the simplest. And so the faculty, I was working with wonderful people who were there before I got there, and the years I had a chance to spend with them were just remarkable years and so forth. But then as time went on, we grew it into a supply chain program. One of the regrets that I have, and I think some of the other faculty, we tried quite a while back to rename our program from logistics into supply chain, and it was a move that really didn't go over very well at the college level. And I think that the reason it didn't go over well is because there were some faculty members in other disciplines that thought it was a power grab on the part of the people in logistics to brand themselves supply chain. But if you looked at what we're doing, and I think they're still doing it at the University of Tennessee, and I think they've changed the name by now. But the definition of supply chain was a very inclusive definition. It was not meant to exclude people from being involved, but to include. As a matter of fact, it was terminology that I think really facilitated better relationships with other functional areas of business instead of causing the opposite effect. So, but as we started out to talk, I was on the faculty at Tennessee for 28 years. My interest broadened. I've always and still continue to be interested in the students at all levels. I always liked teaching all levels, undergraduate, master's, MBA, Ph.D. students. I like those for different reasons and so forth. But I also very much enjoyed working with companies. The university involvements I've had have been very heavy on certain parts of the academic mix, but also including working with organizations that support the programs and so forth. And I was a little bit more interested at that time in not only working with companies that would coming back and sponsor our research and hire our students and attend our forums and so forth, but also trying to do research that was, to the extent possible, relevant to the real-world problems companies were facing. And the people at Georgia Tech had been talking to me for a few years about. Matter of fact, I went through a period of time back in the late 90s where I had 4 or 5 universities that I had talked with over time that wanted me to. But the one thing that had to occur would be any university I might join would be one that I could continue to live in Knoxville, and then so the Georgia Tech opportunity was a perfect one, and it allowed me to really focus more so on executive education, on building relationships with organizations and so forth, business organizations, government organizations, and also teaching, in selected courses, but not on a full-time basis with the teaching. So it was kind of and interesting to me too, and this would be, I think, insightful for professors as they listen to this video. But my position at Georgia Tech was purposely not a tenure track position. I had lots of business opportunities that I was considering as well, and I think tenure's got a great value. At that point in my life, it didn't really have a high priority, and so. But the other thing about the tenure at Georgia Tech was that I was a faculty member in the School of Industrial and Systems Engineering, and that's a very analytical. I mean, these are the best people in the world in terms of quantitative analysis and so forth, and the kinds of things that I was interested in doing and was good at doing, weren't really similar to what they were doing on a daily basis. So you might ask, well, what did I do at Georgia Tech to help row the boat? And part of what I did was provided a practical perspective. I would, from time to time, work with some of the researchers and try to help understand some of the benefits of solving certain types of problems, because they're very good at solving problems, and they wanted to make sure that if they solved a problem, it would be something that would provide a benefit. And then my time here at Penn State, again, several years before I actually left Georgia Tech, I had been contacted by the Penn State faculty to see if I might be interested in a position here. At the time they first talked with me, I said, "This is a great idea, guys, but right now I haven't been at Georgia Tech long enough to do what I'd promised to do, and so several years later that was the case, and it was a comfortable time to leave Tech. There were some new directions that were emerging there, and they have fine, outstanding people at Georgia Tech, and I figured that that they were very capable of accomplishing their objectives, regardless of what direction I took. So I've enjoyed my time here at Penn State and look forward to continuing that relationship.
Did you ever have any opportunities or interest in going into consulting or something else?
I had a lot of opportunities. I was once offered the head of the logistics practice at Booz Allen and Hamilton. I did a lot of consulting work with Mercer Management Consulting, with Accenture and so forth. There was one point in time where I thought about heading into that business full time, but Jim, the part of my career I spent, very highly involved with those companies, and that's the lifestyle that you got to really understand what you're getting yourself into, because it's just there's no limit to what needs to be done and the demands that can be placed on you, and in a heartbeat, and you just if you've got to leave and work in Europe full time for the next 2 years, that's what you do. And so the loss of control over my own schedule was probably something that caused me to steer away from that.
Also cuts into family time.
Oh, it absolutely does. Matter of fact, it's interesting that you mentioned I serve on a few boards. I know this from the experience of being a board member. If we've got a big issue underway, like an acquisition, or somebody's trying to buy you, or whatever, and you hire these investment bankers, we don't have any regard for the fact that they might have a vacation planned or a weekend coming up. It's like, for the fees that we're paying you, I mean, I won't even say I'm sorry. We expect, if it's Friday afternoon, this job will be done by first thing Monday morning. So,
what do you think, in this 40-plus years being an academic, what do you think is your most significant accomplishment?
Well, in general terms, I would say that the to have achieved various things of importance in various areas, a pretty broad area. In other words, I've talked about the terms teaching, research, and service previously, and I think I've been a pretty good participant in all three of those. I've never been the best teacher in the college. I've never been the most prolific researcher in the college. I've never been I've been one of the most highly involved with organizations and so forth. But I think in terms of breadth of activity and trying to take very seriously what I do in each one of them, and having enjoyed it too. I've enjoyed what I've done. So I say that's probably, one of my accomplishments in a very general sense. But on a more profound level, if you said, what have I done in this business over a long period of time that makes it all worthwhile? As my good friend who passed away a long time, Bob Delaney, wrote an article one time, or a report, and he said it's all about relationships. And the relationships that I have been able to form, I obviously would have thought about the ones with faculty members and so forth, and professors. But I never thought in advance about the lifelong relationships I would form with students of all types, primarily Ph.D. students. But some of my very best friends are former Ph.D. students. And to me, that's a reward from having had the privilege of working with them when they were doctoral students, because you just develop a relationship which isn't bounded by time. And now I work with these same people. These are the people I call if I need advice or I'm looking for something. And of course, all about the network among professors. When you need something, you just send an email out or correspond with a few of them, and they'll help you out any way they can. So that's been in terms of accomplishment. And as I said, I feel like it's right place, right time, and I'm very honored to be able to say that a lot of my good friends are former students or professors.
Now, using this as an analogy, probably the most widely reprinted article ever in HBR was Ted Levitt's Marketing Myopia.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a marketing myopia book or article in John Langley's background that you think is, that really has an impact?
Well, it's I like the idea. I think that I've tried to be broad in my thinking. I'm not sure everybody I've worked with would always agree with that. They might say, well, you think you're broad in your thinking, but you're a little more focused. But I do believe that looking at expanding beyond the obvious, and I think Teddy Levitt's article I think it's the best one I've ever read in terms of HBR article. I use it every chance I get in the course. But it reminds us to think beyond the obvious and look and try to expand and so forth. And I think if you can, and of course his story that you're very well aware of was, it's not about trains, it's about transportation. And he didn't use the word logistics, but I've always said it's not about warehousing and transportation. It's about it's not about really logistics. It's about supply chain. It's not just supply chain. It's value. So you can keep getting bigger and bigger on that. But some good messages there that I like your idea that maybe I should sometime expand on that.
Okay. What do you think your legacy is to the profession?
I think, first of all, I think you have to ask other people because I don't know that. I'll speak for myself only. I don't know that I'm qualified to.
What would you like it to be?
What I would like it to be is that people would think of me as somebody who helped this discipline to move forward in a broad kind of a way. Because back in the early 1970s, we had a lot of work ahead of us, and a lot of people pulling in the same direction for a very long period of time. And many of the other people you've interviewed, all of the other people you've interviewed, have set standards in terms of their level of contribution to the profession, their dedication, and so forth, that kind of serve as setting mileposts for the rest of us. And I really feel that we've accomplished a lot in 40 years, but there's still a lot left to do.
The Supply Chain Doctor interviews thought leaders and visionaries who have had an impact on the field of supply chain management, shares professional development concepts for practitioners, and investigates current and future trends in the industry. Interested in sponsoring this show to help you get your message out? Send a note to chris@thescdr.com. We can also help with world-class supply chain education and workshops for you and your team. Thanks for listening.